Let's look at another new wave influence on our AppSec world. Tears for Fears released their debut album, The Hurting, 40 years ago this week. The tracks combine a synth-pop appeal with a stylish gloom. And they also sound like chapter titles in a book on Git branching, with names like Ideas as Opiates, Change, Start of the Breakdown, Mad World, and Memories Fade. It makes me want to shout. Which means this week, we chat with Neatsun Ziv from OSC&R about OSC&R, the open software supply chain attack reference, and how orgs can use it to better protect supply chains. In the news segment, cross-wiring WebSockets, leaking lightsaber side channels, evolving OWASP, improving audit logs, and more. Let it all out and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
Imperva is the comprehensive digital security leader on a mission to help organizations protect their data and all paths to it. Only Imperva protects all digital experiences, from business logic to APIs, microservices, the data layer, and from vulnerable legacy environments to cloud-first organizations. With an integrated approach combining network, application, and data security, Imperva protects companies ranging from cloud-native startups to global multinationals with hybrid infrastructure. Start a free trial today and quickly protect your web applications at securityweekly.com/Imperva. This is episode 231, recorded March 6th, 2023. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Mike, how you doing? I'm looking forward to the upcoming song about Git branching and workflows.
We're going to try, once we get into fixing Git branches, we're going to try and keep it clean. So it's never a pleasant time. But what is a pleasant time is anyone who'd like to be part of our 2023 SC Awards. This is our prestigious and competitive S3 Awards program that recognizes outstanding innovations, organizations, and leaders that are advancing the practice of information security. This year, there are awards in 36 categories across Best Security-Related Training Program, Innovator of the Year, Best SASE Solution, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/SC Awards, sorry about that, SC Awards, to submit your entries by March 13th. Neatsun is the co-founder and CEO of OSC&R. Prior to founding Ox, Neatsun was the VP Cybersecurity at Check Point, where he oversaw all cyber initiatives. His team was one of the first to respond to SolarWinds, NotPetya, and other major attacks, working closely with Interpol, local CERT, and other enforcement agencies. Hello, Neatsun. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Pleasure being here. Great fan.
Well, we appreciate that. And you are here to talk about OSC&R and perhaps a bit more, which we covered a few episodes ago, about supply chain, because supply chain, as perhaps you maybe know better than many people because of SolarWinds, has been in the news for quite a while. So maybe let's start with perhaps that SolarWinds, NotPetya, that era of responding to issues, why supply chains is on everybody's radar right now.
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me. And yes, software supply chain right now is something that you see in the news on a weekly basis. And the software supply shelf is everything that has to do with building your software. It can be part of your building software. It can be part of your code. It can be part of the SaaS services that you're actually using to build your software. And all of those components are always vulnerable to external attackers. Now, why is it becoming so lucrative? And this is really the question. Now, for bad guy economic, think about it. For them, if they can do one attack and then propagate to hundreds and thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of customers, that is the ideal attack. You invest once, you harvest later on for years. And this is exactly what happened in cases like SolarWinds and in other cases like NotPetya. Now, what happened in those cases? Let's take the NotPetya case. Once you attack a software vendor, and this software vendor has some kind of an update mechanism, then spread your update to all of their customer, you're basically enjoying as an attacker the ability to get to so many different customers that trust the original vendor. So this is a very unique software supply chain attack But this is not the only one. We've seen so many different cases, and as you can imagine, attackers are getting creative day after day because they see the amount of potential those kinds of attacks have right now.
Yeah, and then one of the things, obviously, organizations don't want to be the next SolarWinds to show up in the news and be the one that everybody picks on. And so it begs the question, what should they do? And now we're going to talk about the OWASP and top 10 and some of the other things in our news segment coming up. But I say that in the sense of, we have top 10 lists or top N lists, but are they as effective? I'm kind of leading here with, why did OSC&R come about? Because it's not positioned as a top 10 list.
Okay, so top 10 list is definitely a must-have. So it's a great way to say to somebody that is not a security professional, these are the top 10 risks that you should be aware. But there is no one list. There are several lists that you need to know about. Now, what's the challenge? Let's say that I'm part of a security team, and now I need to assess whether my software supply chain is secure. Now, everybody is splashing a bit of paint on different sections on the screen and saying, here, you've got this security right here, and you've got this tool that can do this for you. And what we're trying to say is that if I'm trying to assess my situation, I don't have any map. Now, for me, a map would be what, for example, MITRE did when they created the enterprise attack matrix. So they've listed every kind of attack vector that they found that relates to the endpoint, for example. So you've got a map. Now you've got something that you can compare and say, okay, I understand this is well protected. This is not covered at all. I can have some compensating controls for this, and I can understand what is my posture. For software supply chain, we did not have this at all. So every conversation that we had is somebody saying, no, the most important thing is doing this or that. And we couldn't get to an agreement. So what we've done is, with about 20 different companies that participated in the creation of OSC&R, we helped analyze over 300 attacks that we've seen that are classified as software supply chain. We broke them down into the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, and we simply mapped everything. So we placed it under the site pbom.dev, pbom.dev, so everybody can actually participate, take part of the discussion, contribute, and use this as a reference so they can actually understand what are the exposures, what are the risks, how should they think about assessing their own software supply chain. And this is, of course, a resource that we created that is free for everybody. And right now there's also a GitHub extension for it, so everybody can actually pull requests for it.
Yeah, and the PBOM, the pbom.dev and the OSC&R framework is pretty expansive. And obviously PBOM it brings to mind SBOM. But the P here for pipeline is much more about perhaps the full attack surface from IDE all the way to the artifact that's deployed or that's someone, some third party or some customer downloads from a SolarWinds or someone else. Tell us a bit more about that attack surface and what it was like to get 20 different orgs or, roughly 20 different organizations to agree or share this type of information so you could come up with something that's reflective of what the attacks look like.
Okay. So SBOM, for the sake of discussion, think about it as an Excel spreadsheet with 4 columns saying open source name, version, license, and known vulnerabilities. A big software, let's say, that is 10, 20 years in the business should have roughly 3,000 lines per software in this list. Now, what do you do with it? Nobody really knows, but it is really important for creating the transparency. And I think it matures the industry for sure, no joke about it. Yet the value in terms of security is not that high yet. So the challenge becomes, let's take the 300 attacks that we've seen. For how many of them actually would a list, let's say it is fully updatable, fully searchable, how many of them would a list like this help? And I think about 2 cases, but once you know, let's say Log4j is one of them, once you know that you have Log4j, now you need to actually search for it where it is deployed in production. So once again, it doesn't really tell you what you need to do. You need, again, to take everybody, say, guys, sorry, I know that it was supposed to be a nice weekend. It is not going to be one of those. Go to work. unfortunately. And we've seen this over and over again. So PBOM is, think about an extension that covers everything that you capture as you're building your software. So the analogy would be, let's say that I've got allergy to nuts, and I've got a candy bar saying it does not contain any nuts, but I don't know if the factory has other candy bars being manufactured there that might have nuts. So you need to capture everything in your environment, saying, how did you build it? Did you audit the people that can actually become an admin? Do you know your CI/CD? Where is it deployed? And there are a lot of different parameters in this equation. And this is, we built the PBOM based on the attacks that we've seen in the OSC&R framework. So now you've got everything in a single place. Now, as for your question, how did we get to an agreement on the ASBOM itself, or sorry, the OSC&R itself? It's actually very easy. We built it in a way that anybody can contribute. We couldn't really disagree on anything because everybody just took a different part and said, I had experience with this kind of an attack, unfortunately, and I want to share my knowledge on this topic. And now that we're working on the second stage, which is actually trying to explain what is going to be the playbook for each one of those cubics in the metrics itself, everybody is simply contributing and saying, I want to take this component and contribute. So it's based completely on contribution. It's not a place that we need to agree on everything together. This is part of the beauty of it.
And it is quite beautiful, and it's also quite expansive too. You have 12 broad categories, from reconnaissance to privileged escalation, lateral movement, collection of logs, or the collection of, sorry, not the collection of logs, collection of data that's going to be exfiltrated by attackers. So if we look at this and we see this is a large attack surface, you gave us an idea of how organizations contribute to it, build what they've seen. But now, what if I'm the consumer of this? How do I start to turn this into a plan? Whether I'm a CISO, I'm a VP of engineering, I need to figure out, we want to have a secure PBOM. What do we do?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, you go on the map itself. The map is not directly linked into tools. It is directly linked to what bad guys are doing out there. So the idea is just to look at everything from the attacker's perspective. The way that it is built, if you look on it from a broad view, it is built from the reconnaissance on the left, saying, what are the information that I can actually understand on who to attack? So let's take Circle CI as an example. If somebody that holds the credentials to one of my important systems is exposed in LinkedIn, just a fake example, non-related to that case, and he has his email, then in a high probability, he's going to get somebody trying to phish his credentials or create some kind of an attack on his actual device. So when you think about it, you might say, okay, so thinking about reconnaissance, maybe it's not a good idea to expose this information on social network. If you go to the right saying, what's my entry point? Then you might say, okay, so I need to make sure that those entry points are clear. But what happens a step afterwards? Like we've seen last week. So let's say that somebody already got into my organization. Now, can he get some more credentials and get to other places and do lateral movement just with credentials? And those are things you start thinking about him as second stage and second circle. So the OSC&R framework actually allows you to create some kind of a mechanism or a framework that you can think in layers, just like MITRE did. And I think that's one of the best examples out there.
And so I think a natural question is, it enables you to think in layers, which definitely agree about. I love the clarity of this map. But are people doing that? So, for example, we're talking about, you're pointing out this is an attack surface. These are the ways that are being attacked. These are non-instructions for how to go and secure your environment, because SolarWinds talked about they build their software in 3 different places and then make sure that those 3 different builds converge onto the same SHA. Not everybody wants to build, redundant pipelines. The Circle CI you mentioned, that was a very different type of attack that was just about credential reuse essentially. How have you seen CISOs, organizations adopt this successfully, or how are they responding to this right now?
So when they think about the OSC&R framework, it allows them to get a clearance or a same level of discussion with their peers and their employees. So they can actually say, okay, let's take this map, have some kind of an assessment, and see what we have as a blind spot. That's currently the way it is used. Now, how do you get it to be automated and continuously secure? That's a completely different topic. This is where Ox, which is a commercial company, comes into place to actually understand this journey with the customers and have prevention mechanism to prevent the common attacks. As we are constantly analyzing those attacks, we also writing their protection mechanisms. So every time we're going to see something new, we're adding it to Ox. So it is a continuous software supply chain security. But OSC&R is unrelated. It's an endeavor by 20 different companies. We are one of them.
Right. Yeah. OSC&R has had that open collaborative framework as you were describing.
Exactly.
One of the things that I try to politely rib the OWASP web top 10 list on is that it's been around for 20 plus years. We still have SQL injection. We still have cross-site scripting. OSC&R, not a list, it's a different presentation of attacks, but how would you point to it, or how would you like to see it adopted so that we don't have the same OSC&R entries 20 years from now?
So first of all, the OWASP list actually changes once in a while. They deprioritize and reprioritize things by what they see. And I do think that SQL injection is actually going to stay with us for additional time.
I'm going to cry.
XSS, we've been talking about it for at least 10 years. It's still around. CSRF, the same, meaning the platforms are trying to take ownership, but we hadn't seen things that replace them completely. Not yet. So from my perspective, I'm looking on the OSC&R framework. So the OSC&R framework is prioritized by the intensity and the amount of cases and their impact. And I think that we don't see those, I would say, vectors go away. They just get pulled down. And after a while, somebody thinks that it's a good idea to do a retro attack, take those, and actually, since everybody lost interest of those, especially if they dropped from the top 10, and there you go, they're back on top. So, for example, if I'm looking again on NotPetya and SolarWinds, you can find some kind of a resemblance between them. And the difference between them is just 3 years. Not a big deal in terms of security. But I do agree that just a list of 10 items is not sufficient. But I think the challenge is when you're working with large development groups, you can't teach everything. You need to rely on other mechanisms to prevent it. Those top is just to be able to explain everything in one day, saying, here's a crash course on security and why it is important. And when you see developers on the first day understand the concept of SQL injection, you see that something changes in their perception. And I really like that moment when you actually show for the first time in a capture the flag, you show them that it is real. It is mind-blowing.
Yeah, there's definitely that fun reaction of, oh, that's what you've been talking about. But followed by the hopefully important follow-on of, oh, this is what we should do about it. And OSC&R is very much, not necessarily what we should do about it, but maybe I would frame it as OSC&R shows where we should be doing things. And by these doing things means we have a control of some sort, whether it's a tool, a practice. We're getting rid of, preventing typo squatting, for example. So, that's one of the entries in here. When developers, or I guess actually, let me ask it this way. I can look at this list, you and I and John can look at this list and understand typo squatting, these types of things. How would you introduce this OSC&R reference to developers who don't necessarily have that background knowledge and domain knowledge, and tell them, go prevent these types of attacks, go fix our attack surface so it's narrowed down and we're not going to get popped in a SolarWinds manner or Circle CI or whoever is in the, whatever breaches this week?
I'm going to have a different answer from what you think. The answer is I don't. I think that trying to educate developers on all the attacks, at least from my experience, it constantly fails. I'll give one interesting example. in one of the groups that I managed that were R&D based. So we managed the group, we did education, we did the bug bounty week, we cleared everything. But then 3 weeks afterwards, a new developer joined. He wasn't part of the training. And the next training is probably in a year from now. And now you've got one developer doing security issues. 3 weeks afterwards, a new developer comes in. 3 weeks afterwards, somebody quits and you hire somebody instead. So within, let's say, 6 months, all the education that you've done is actually effective, let's say 20, 30%. Without the movement of DevSecOps that integrates this knowledge into the build process itself, and without being able to communicate with developers in their own language, saying, first of all, it needs to have a ticket saying why is it important. I need to have a good explanation about why is the priority. So a description might be, the code that you're right now using is in production. You're using the package that is not the original package that somebody intended to do this. If you look on certain examples like Bitco and so, you can see this has been used to do a software supply chain attack. We really recommend that you find another package. We want you to block this merge and do something else. Do you want to proceed? Now, when you actually show the facts and saying you are going to be liable, this is a major risk. Most developers don't press, okay, I'll take the risk. Let's move on. They're actually saying, you know what? If you're talking to me in a language that I can explain, you show me the evidence in a very, very easy language, most of them actually give attention, say, you know what, I don't want to be in this. Let me ask somebody. And it creates the right movement versus what we currently see, which is you run some kind of a tool, you get 10,000 results, you send them to engineering and say, guys, go fix it. It's really important to do that.
Good luck.
It doesn't drive the right behavior. And we're trying to say, let's bring one that we can make sure that we are providing all the evidence, why we think it's important, why it's not a false positive, why you should fix it, and we see it drives attention.
Yeah, I think I love that answer because it's very much steps away from a CVE-oriented type of vuln. You mentioned Log4j, but Log4j is just a good example of a very difficult situation to figure out, is this present? How do we patch it? How do we even discover the presence of Log4j on our network as opposed to this is just a CVE to fix? And I think what you were describing there is the conversation or framing with developers. This is going to make the attacker's job more difficult. It sounds like that's a lot of the thrust here. And I guess I'm curious of how does that turn, how does that turn into, or does that just turn into fix this flaw from a scanner that a scanner found, stay up to date on your third-party dependencies? Because the OSC&R framework hits, a wide range of practices that involve developers as well as non-developers, people responsible for other parts of that build pipeline.
So yes, the OSC&R framework doesn't tell you yet how to address it, but let's imagine for a second a world that when you encounter a password, let's say you've got a password embedded in code, then you'd probably ask yourself a few questions. Like the very basic one is this key even active? What kind of key is it?
Fair enough.
So if you just go back to developer and say, look, line 500 something, you've got a key. I said, no, this is not a key. Then you lose the reliability. And if you do it twice and 3 times, you just lose their ability to trust you. And everything needs to be based on trust. And as security professionals, sometimes we miss this because creating this trust today requires the application security guys to invest a lot of effort actually to triage the facts themselves, get to the details, understand them. It takes them hours just to prepare one case. And most scanners today, it doesn't matter what kind of scanner, SAS, DAS, software composition, it doesn't matter which one, will get you the 10,000 results really, really fast. And most of them, by the way, are accurate. They're simply not really exploitable in the context of the organization. So you'd get developers saying, yes, I know that I've got here an SQL, but this is an internal application that we're doing tests for developers. It is not deployed in production. And once you do it 3 times, and every time you've got a different excuse, it's okay for the developers to actually push back and say, you know what, the easiest excuse is, it's not connected to the internet, leave me alone. And if you're trying to predict the questions and give them the answer and say, guys, this is actually connected to the internet. Here's the diagram for this component to be directly connected to the internet. Here's the API. It's connecting to a code. Here's the open source that you're using. It is actually loaded into memory. And here's the function that is known to be vulnerable. Said, oh, okay, thank you. And here's the recommendation, by the way, for the fix. I've opened for you a push request. You can approve it if you'd like. Here's the link to do that. Thank you. And the end of the discussion.
So that's, you're hurting my brain there a little bit. So, okay, so for folks who haven't seen this yet, we talked about PBOM on the show a few weeks ago, but a quick refresh for folks. Down the left-hand side, we've got a bunch of different sort of categories of areas to think about, parts of your pipeline, if I'll say that. Then across top, there's a bunch of different sort of standard categories of issues which we're familiar with: reconnaissance, initial access, execution, persistence, privilege escalation. The reason I'm sort of talking these out to people is before I go down this path is, as Mike was saying, it's super complex, or not super complex. There's a lot of things to be to juggle or to be concerned about. So just sort of my concern was sort of similar to what he was just saying, but I was looking at it from the point of view of who, I don't want to say who's responsible, but this is sort of, I think, highlighting in a way that there's many, many folks in an org. Hopefully it's many folks, not just one person, but there's many folks that have to sort of help solve the issues in this that you've sort of matrixed out. And it's really good doc. But I'm bringing that back to now that example you just gave of like the way, so the voice I heard at the end of what you said there was the AppSec person sort of identified the issue, came up with a PR, and the API ensured the function was that it was actually problematic. So I guess the question where I was thinking before you got right quite there, where I'm still stumbling over my words, is if we have to look at an average organization that doesn't have your tool or a tool, they've got the scanners or whatever else, maybe they don't, but like how do you deal with this much stuff? And I'm not so much, I mean, I think this is sort of the core of the problem in AppSec in general, right? As we get more and more complex in these pipelines. Is that sort of your answer, or am I clarifying or confusing in what I'm describing here?
I think what you're describing right now, this is kind of the reason that we started OSC&R. We were in the situation, and it's true. As you're adding more tools, you're thinking that you get more security, but you're not getting the more security, you're getting more lists. Now, the translation from lists to actual security goes through engineering. Now, it is true that engineering are the only one that can fix the issue, but if, as security expert, it is hard for you to express why do you need to fix things and why do you need to prioritize the right things to be fixed, then you're going to fix some problems, not necessarily the most important ones, not necessarily the ones that are actually exposed, and you might completely ignore certain vectors. When NotPetya came out, it was science fiction. When we saw it later on in another attack, it wasn't science fiction. We had documents from the last year saying how is it actually done. So when you think about this, from my perspective, in most organizations, the application security team are accountable for this. The fact that they can't solve the problem is something technical that they need to work with. So most get to the model of shared accountability or shared responsibility, if I should say, where they pass to the engineering team the ability to say something like, you build it, you secure it, and you operate it. But the challenge with this is that if they don't define the borderline, saying, why is this important? What is my boundary? What is okay versus what is not okay? Then you lose track.
Yeah, and I think one of the questions I was going to bring up there that you touched on again with that answer was you'd mentioned, is this exploitable? What was the context of this particular vuln in our organization? And initially, I think talking about scanners and they do they produce false positives? What volume of issues do they identify? Those are sort of classic scanner oriented approaches to dealing with AppSec. What OSC&R looks like, and I think perhaps an aspect of what John was also pointing towards is that on your left-hand side, if you look at this, the OSC&R page, you have container security, secrets hygiene, CI/CD posture, just as 3 examples. Mm-hmm. Those are likely 3 different engineering teams. So one of the conversations here, I think, is how do you use OSC&R to prioritize amongst those teams? Or it looks like, I think, as a leading question, OSC&R can lead towards that because we're not talking about false positives or volume of findings. We're talking about techniques. We're talking about where the pipeline is going to be attacked.
So you got it right. The OSC&R framework doesn't talk about internal politics at all. It talks about what attackers are going to do. And they don't really care whether this is one organization managed from one country and another organization managed from another place and third one that is outsourced. They don't really care. They see the organization as one. And if the problem is in the container or in the code or in the posture of the Git or missing, it doesn't matter for them. They really don't know who's handling what behind the scenes. And for them, it is even better that it's different teams. So OSC&R, from that perspective, if somebody's looking on the entire software supply chain, it helps create visibility saying, guys, if the container is for us an open issue, there are great vendors out there that you can approach towards container scanning. And the same goes for secret scanning, and the same goes for the open source, and there are great vendors for everything. But if you just say, and we've seen this quite a lot, what are you doing for your software supply chain? Oh, we've got this vendor that is doing our open source reputation. So, okay, and what about the rest? So what rest? The OSC&R framework is supposed to give you a frame saying, think about it as from the left to the right. This is everything that you need to know. This is not theoretical. This is documented from attacks that happened. So it is a way to collaborate within teams saying, yes, this is what is exposed, not exposed, and what we're trying to do in OSC is actually bring everything to a certain place. You'll have a view and an ability to actually prevent and automate those kind of things.
I'm sort of curious. I want to use you as a barometer for a second. As you either as an individual working on this doc with the folks who've contributed, or as part of OSC, when you go out to folks in the world and you show them this, I don't know, either a purchaser or an engineering manager or an AppSec person, any of these different personalities. What's the response you're getting? Or is it like, are they going, yeah, we know that, thanks for putting into a grid? Or is it, oh my God, this is horrible, I'm never going to deal with this? Or are you seeing any sort of pattern in how people respond to this?
So I think that the immediate response that we see is they're trying to map the tools that they have to what attack vectors are mapped out there. They say, oh, I've got software composition. This covers this and this. I'm not sure it covers typo scoring. Is it? John, can you please check if this and this happens? So it is a way for them to actually just do the initial assessment. Usually in the first meeting, they get about 5 minutes of discussion to see this. And then we get feedback over mail. And some of them, by the way, joined afterwards to to contribute, saying, oh, we had this case and we want to share our knowledge with the community. But the initial reaction is mapping what do we have right now to this map. They're trying to understand if they've got 60% covered, 10% covered, 100% covered, because this is the first time that they're seeing a map of the landscape.
But that sounds, if I could categorize that, it sounds like it's sort of learned open-mindedness, or not, like it's not scaring them out of the room.
No,
Okay.
No, definitely not. Meaning they are exposed to the threats, whether they've seen the map or not. They've already bought several tools. Most of the organizations that we're working with already bought several tools. They never connected the dots between all the different tools. And now they've got a map that's actually said, okay, I understand software composition goes here, this goes here, the real time goes here. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think as you're describing it goes here, I'm imagining looking at these columns of OSC&R and thinking like, oh, a naive initial question or a statement is, we don't want to be attacked like SolarWinds was. But that's not really great strategy. You'd have to break it down. Well, we want to avoid like credential hijacking, or we want to get lateral movement or in-memory manipulation of the source code as it's being built. That's a very specific thing. So if you grabbed a tool that just protected you there and colored in whichever rectangle on OSC&R fixes that, you might have one nice little green blob surrounded by this sea of white, these uncolored in rectangles that show you, I think, as you're saying, repeating back to you, these are areas that you've missed. Your tooling, you're missing coverage on these techniques.
Mm-hmm. So I think that once people see that gives them a roadmap saying, okay, we understand that over the coming quarters or years, we will need to invest in those techniques. I think that for most, by the way, you've got a very, very easy way to start. There are great open source tools if people don't have the budget to get started, just to get the initial coverage. And it is my experience so far that most organizations don't really need the super complicated tools getting into so much depth. They're really just covering the surface. This is what they've got in terms of budget and in terms of headcount to do. It is really the high-end organization that get to deal with things that are medium in the results. So it's mostly about getting the critical ones and getting the high ones into some kind of an SLA. That's, I'll probably say 90% or 90% plus of the organization really are in the stage saying, I need a broad view of what's going on in the industry versus a very, very deep tool in one silo that can give me really nuances on really important niche things that are low priority. That's our experience so far.
That's cool. And I think as we start to run out of time to ask you more questions, one of the last ones I want to ask is that an organization looks at OSC&R today, a year now, or maybe 2 years from now, how would you like to see, what would be an ideal state from what that organization has done based on some influence from OSC&R?
So I'll split it to two different answers. One is, I hope that OSC&R in a year plus from now will also have a playbook saying, if this is of interest, this is what we recommend to do, that you can start right now. So it's actually taking all the knowledge that we've accumulated as a community and saying, guys, this is the recommendation playbook, go play with it. I think that if we'll be able to get there in a year plus, that would be really amazing. And we're always looking for more contributors to help with this endeavor. Now, as for organizations, I hope that as we are comparing their current status and let's say 18 months from now, they're going to see way more green and covered versus white space that they have right now. And the white space is where you currently have the highest exposure, because you need just one exploit in a category that nobody knows about, and you can use it for a year plus until everybody knows about it. Versus something that all the industry knows about this specific technique, but it always changes just the log4j now or OpenSSL3 later on.
No, so that was very good splitting into two answers, but this time I'm going to constrain you to just 3 words. We always like to ask our guests, Neatsun, describe AppSec in 3 words. So what's your response to that one?
Oh, that's a good one. I'll take the answer of the pyramid of pain. Definitely pyramid of pain. The more you invest, the harder it gets.
Oh dear. I'm not sure we can, we'll see if we can put that into an optimist category or not, but I love that answer. With that, while people are dealing with their pyramid of pain, any parting words or calls to action in addition to the more collaboration on OSC&R that you've mentioned earlier on?
Yeah, definitely collaboration, and please contact us. We are always looking for people that are knowledgeable and passionate to assist. And if you're looking for better coverage or having a discussion, contact us via LinkedIn, via our website, ox.security. and be part of the discussion. It's defense is a community play. It's not something that you do alone.
Indeed. And we couldn't have done this segment alone without you, Neatsun. So thank you for sharing your passion and knowledge with us as well.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.
Also want to say thank you to John and thank you to all of our listeners. We're going to take a quick break and return with news of the week.